Hi Erica, how are you? How's your week going?
Hi, my week was great. Yesterday I actually hung out with some friends. We went out to a park. We had like a little picnic because I had
Oh,
the day off work. So it was Monday. We had the day off work, and we just went to a park, had some food, did a picnic thing. It was great. It was like by the lake, so it was very relaxing. I really, really needed that.
spoony friendly picnic.
Yes. So we just ordered food from somewhere. I didn't want to be in a restaurant. And I told them
Yeah.
before, like, I texted them and I was like, hey, I'm still not comfortable with COVID and everything. I don't want to be in a restaurant. So they're like, hey, let's go to the lake. Let's do a picnic. We'll just pick up food from somewhere. And it was the best.
I actually love that because um that's totally a struggle with a when you have like a chronic illness as a spoonie, like making sure communicating to your friends and family like this is what I need.
Yeah.
And and what's cool to hear, it sounds like they were like totally accommodating and they were totally fine with.
Yeah, because I texted them and I was like, "Hey guys, like it's been months that I've been to a restaurant. Like I don't even know what's out there anymore. I don't know what's good." So I was like, "If you guys have suggestions or like things that we can do," and they were just so helpful. And they were like, "Let's go here. How about this or how about that?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm so grateful for you guys."
Oh, I love that. How's symptoms this week? Good week, bad week, average.
Yesterday was good. Today, not so much. So I just had some peppermint tea with maple syrup because my stomach was acting up a little bit. I laid down, took a nap. So I've been taking it easy today because it's been a bit rough. But yesterday was good. It's just every day
Good.
is different.
I love that you drink peppermint tea because that's definitely my go-to when I have a stomach flare up. I have two peppermint tea bags in my work bag that I'm gonna probably have today because my tummy is not doing so great. Um, Yesterday, I actually went to the physio. I haven't been to the physio in a while, like properly, because I have chronic pain, like all over issues with my body, like ankles, knees, hamstrings, neck, back, shoulders, etc. And so I'm on this new like treatment plan, which is
Yeah.
really good. So I'm like this week I'm so motivated to get things back in order with my body. Like my movement has been off, and I'll post a little bit more about it on like Instagram and stuff. But
Yes.
do you know when you see like a health professional and you just feel so motivated after seeing them? And it's
Yes.
like you're like, I'm not sure that you're doing anything better than the next guy, the next physio or the next health professional, but like I feel motivated after I see you, and that's half of it, right?
Yes, my doctor's like that as well. Every time I leave, he's like, okay, so we're gonna try this, we're gonna do this, and next time we're gonna do this other thing. Like there's a plan. And I'm like, okay, I like this. It's just
That's what you need though. And it's like steps, right? He did this whole thing, he wrote out, he's like, this is what we're gonna do, this is what it's gonna look like. And I keep telling him to give me more exercises and like push me a bit harder. And he's like, no, Jamie, you need to chill. Do you get that one too? It's like
No,
typical.
not yeah,
Oh,
but I mean, I know I would probably be the same where I'm like, I want to start doing the next thing and, kind of like, because I'm very much like that where I'm like, if we can keep going and we can keep getting better, like for sure, I want to, keep going with the
yeah,
treatment and everything. Yeah,
I'm the same. But then they're like, okay, we're gonna go slow so you don't hurt yourself
yeah.
because typical like type A spoonie
Mhm.
wants to
Sure.
overdo it over here. um, okay, this is one of my favorite parts of this show because we get to talk about your pet peeve.
The
So
most random thing ever.
it's low key like an opportunity to um like I don't want to make this negative, but I love just like hearing what annoys people because it's different for everyone. So, question of the hour: what is your pet peeve?
Okay, so this is really weird. So my dad and my niece do this thing where every time they heat up food in the microwave, like they open the door and then they just get their food and leave it open. I'm
They
like,
leave it open.
yes. Like what is so hard about closing that door? I don't understand.
It's
And so
like
I'll go
when
in I'll go into the kitchen, get a snack, and I just see the microwave door open, and I'm like, this makes absolute it drives me insane. It makes no sense.
Have you
Why?
told them?
Yes. And they
And
still do.
oh, bless.
Like, can we just close the door, please?
That's so funny. And it's one of those things like it doesn't annoy other people. I have probably a lot of pet peeves, but that reminds me of one where when I was living with my parents, my mom never like coiled up the vacuum cord when she was done vacuuming.
Oh my
Like she would
god.
always just like put it back in the
Oh no.
closet without and just like leave it in a heap on the ground.
That would
And
bother
I'd be like, "Mom,
me.
you need to coil the vacuum." She's like, "Doesn't matter." I'm like, "No, it does. I can't handle it." And I moved out and she sent me a message like not long ago with a photo of the vacuum with it coiled. And she's like, "Look, Jamie, I coiled the vacuum for you." Makes my heart happy. I feel that. I feel that pet peeve. Um, so the topic for today is essentially what it's like working, op- how to be your best person, how to live your best life at work with a chronic illness. And I love this topic because it's something I kind of dealt with when I had chronic fatigue syndrome. I probably didn't deal with it as well as you did. So I just kind of want to, and like, there's so many people. How do you navigate that? How do you like? When is the right time to tell your boss that you have chronic illness? How do you advocate for yourself? How do you say no? How do you take breaks, et cetera, et cetera? Um, so I'd love to get into that. And I guess my first sort of topic that I want to talk about is kind of the biggest challenge that comes with working with a chronic illness. And I'm keen to hear your perspective on, like, at least for you, and maybe on a more global level, what do you think that challenge is, and how can we maybe start to overcome that?
I think the biggest challenge is telling your employers, your supervisors, and letting
Yeah.
other people know. I think we're so good at hiding our illness sometimes, and we're so good at, we want to just be like every other employee in there. We don't really want to stand out, at least not in that way where it's like, oh, I have an illness. So you have to kind of, be kind of extra patient with me. And it's hard to have that conversation where you have to tell your employer, like, I have a chronic illness, so I do have
Yeah.
to leave early sometimes. I do have doctor's appointments. Um, and it can be very difficult to start that conversation. So I think that's the biggest challenge is starting that conversation for sure.
So you're a teacher.
Yes.
You teach third grade, which in America, what age group is that?
So then about 8, 9 years old.
Okay. So how long have you been working at the school that, or working as a teacher?
As a teacher, 5 years at the same school that I'm at now, 4 years. So they know me
Okay.
pretty well.
And did you have chronic illness when you started working there?
No, I didn't. I was actually working with them while I was in the process of getting diagnosed.
Okay, wow.
It was
So
left.
what was that, I guess, what was that like for you kind of navigating that in while you were dealing, did you have to take a lot of days off work? Did people notice? What was that like?
Yes, I did take a lot of days off work. I would go to the doctors constantly because it was when I was trying to figure out what was going on. And I asked for a lot of early days off, and they would just ask. And I would just say, there's something wrong. I'm really not sure. I'm trying to figure it out. I would go for ultrasounds and just trying to explain to my primary care physician, like, there's something going on with me. Um, and it was just a lot of I think that year, it's such a blur for me, I don't even remember it because I was
Yeah.
just so in so much pain and just trying to get through it and trying to figure out what was going on. But luckily, I had a principal and an assistant principal, and they were so understanding, and they would let me go early. And my coworkers would cover, like if I had to do dismissal, they would cover for me. So I was very lucky to
Wow.
have people that were supportive and were like, "Yeah, go to the doctors, go and figure out what's going on."
That's interesting. So, because it's like they knew you before, and then it
Yes.
kind of evolved into. So it's almost like they were kind of in on that journey with you. Is that
They really were, yeah.
so? And did you feel supported by your workplace?
I did, like, I didn't have, any issues. I think what I was struggling with is I like to be a very good employee. Like
Yeah.
I give my everything to my students. I want to be there for them. And I think what was affecting me the most is that I couldn't be there for them in the way that I wanted to. Like I knew I wasn't giving 100% to my job because something was wrong with my health. And so I think that was my biggest struggle during that time.
Yeah, I can relate with that because it's like, at least for me when I was working, it was like, you know that were you well, your capacity would be here and you would be able to perform at this level. But in sickness, it's like you have maybe like 30 to 40 to 50% less
Exactly.
productivity.
Yeah.
And that's something that I struggled with as well, because it's like, I mean, and the up and down of it as well is some days I'd be fine, some days I'd be sitting at my desk nodding off because I was so exhausted.
Yes.
And when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, so I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, couldn't work for 9 months, and then I got my first job as an admin assistant. And I had chronic fatigue when I got the job.
Yeah.
I was working initially 20 hours a week, and then I think within 6 months I was working full time, but I didn't tell anyone until maybe a year into working there. Um, which was interesting because I think one of the reasons why is because in America, I was working for the headquarters of a restaurant chain.
Okay.
There's that job insecurity. There's
Yes.
like I don't know how it depends on the state in America, but people can literally fire you, and if they don't give a reason, then that's they can legally fire you.
Wow.
I don't know if you knew that. It's very interesting.
Not. I
Certain
don't know if
certain
it works like
states
that. Wow.
Certain states you can't do that, but certain states, as long as you don't give a reason why you're firing the person, you can fire them. There's not that job security, so I think there was very much that fear of I don't know, being judged or being seen as weak or incapable. And did you have that kind of that like internal fear of being seen that way?
Yes, because in education, it's a lot about the student's success. Are the students learning? Are their test scores high? And so that year, I was so preoccupied with like, there's something wrong with me that I couldn't really teach them the way that I wanted to. I didn't have that energy to do all of that. So I definitely felt like, oh my gosh, they're going to think I'm the worst teacher. They're going to want to
Mm,
like move me to another school. They don't want me to work at the school anymore. So it was, I definitely had those thoughts where I'm just like, I'm not as good as I can be right now. And I didn't know why. It was insane.
yeah. And so you were diagnosed with Crohn's.
Yes.
And what was it like actually when you were like having that conversation with your boss and colleagues, like when you were diagnosed and had a little bit more clarity? Did you have a conversation and was it like, how are we gonna, I mean, accommodate you? What was that like?
So the principal that I had at that time, I have a different one now, but the one that I had at that time, she was very understanding. And I think her husband actually had Crohn's as well, or he still does.
Okay.
So she kind of knew a little bit of what I was dealing with. So I didn't have to have too deep of a conversation where I had to like tell her what it was and how it affects me. So
Mm,
she kind of knew, but I think my Crohn's is a bit worse than her husband's because I would talk about treatments and she would ask me like how doctor's appointments went. And so I would tell her about different medications and she was like, "Oh, I haven't heard of that one," or "I'm not really sure what that is." And so
okay.
I also had to explain kind of like, this medication is going to do this, or I might get these side effects. But she was very understanding and asked a lot of questions, which was really awesome for me because I would be able to give her all the information of why I'm feeling certain ways, certain days, and why I may have to leave early. So it was great that she asked questions and was interested.
And so that actually is really good, and that's what I found with my boss as well, is you want someone that's actually like, okay, you know, tries to be understanding. Did you at the time kind of know that you were gonna need accommodations and were able to communicate that? Or was it just, "I'm just letting you know, that this is what I'm going through," or what was that like?
So at the time, it was just letting her know. I was still trying to figure out the illness itself. I had
Yeah,
heard of Crohn's. So I was still trying to figure out, okay, wait, what do I eat? What am I supposed to do? How do I manage this? So my focus was more on that, on managing it myself. And I
yeah,
think now I'm at a point where I'm like, okay, wait, I need to go to the HR website. I need to see, if I ever am hospitalized, what does that mean for me? Do I still get paid and all of that? So um, a couple of months after is when I started kind of looking into that and kind of seeing what the district offers me because
yeah.
at first it was just managing it. How do I manage it?
Well, and getting to know your rights as well, and I think this is something that I didn't do when I had a chronic illness, because I think I was thinking about this today actually, before the podcast. Like, Jamie, why didn't you do that? I think at the time I was so focused on recovery that I was like, I don't want, which I think is good to like have that ambition to recover, but also like, one, not everybody has that too. Like, you do live with it for a certain period of time and with severe symptoms, less severe symptoms. And what does it look like to live the best way you can in that time? And um yeah, that didn't that didn't happen for me. And there's so little awareness around these conditions that it's like that wasn't even on my radar as much. Like, what are my legal rights in this situation? I never looked into that. So I think, I guess the encouragement, I guess, for whoever's listening is to make sure you know your rights. And we're going to put some of this stuff in the show notes. But what was that process like for you to get to know your rights as an employee, and I mean, exercise those rights?
So I think for me, it was more realizing that, okay, I have a disability. So it was having to come to
Yeah,
terms with the fact that, like, yes, I am one of those people who's going to have to go to HR and let them know, like, hey, I have a disability. And just looking into the pay aspect of it if I ever am hospitalized, which I haven't yet, but it could very well be a possibility. So I want to know, will I still get paid? Once I get better, do I still have a job? And for education, all of that is true. So because I've been working at the district for 4 years now, they have to legally keep my spot. Like, I still have a job once I'm well, and I still get paid during that time. So I do have paid medical leave, which was
that's
really good
great.
and really, really good to find out. Um, and it's just I'm glad for that.
Yeah, that's really good. Definitely, I don't think I would have had that at my job because I worked in the private sector. And so I remember I didn't even look into the legal side of things. And so I think it's important to note that the legal side and your legal rights are going to vary based on where you work, what country you live in, et cetera, et cetera. And we're going to give some resources in that regard. But I think the takeaway from that is, and that what's interesting about what you're saying is, it's so important to advocate for yourself. And
Yes.
then circling back to what you said initially is, I had to realize that I had a disability. And that's like the first step is acceptance.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Not it's not giving in, or saying like, I'm gonna just, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? It's not this like, I'm going to become the victim or I'm going to give up. It's
Right.
acknowledging that something's wrong, that you need help, that you need resources and accommodations. And that's okay. That doesn't make you less than the next person, less capable. And I kind of think that that's a little bit the takeaway from that is like, for our listeners, if you have a chronic illness, if you are early on the journey, late in the journey, educate yourself on your rights, educate yourself on what you can do as an employee. And um, I guess I don't like what do you think in terms like when when do you think the right time to tell your employer is? I know it's like a big question, but what are your thoughts around that?
So it's interesting for me because I was diagnosed, in the middle of being a teacher in the middle of my career. But I think if I would have been diagnosed before, I wouldn't have said it during the interview just because I want to be hired for my capabilities and my talent and what I can do. And I think once you secure the job, you've got it. And then I think you let your employer know that you're living with a chronic illness. And it's important that you tell your employer a little bit more about it so they're not too afraid because not many people have heard of Crohn's, not many people have heard of other chronic illnesses. So just giving them kind of a little bit about what it is to deal with every day, and just a little bit about how it might affect your work, which, I mean, really for me it's just let me leave early when I need to and when I have doctor's appointments. And I think most employers are understanding as long as you've got um, everything covered, what you're supposed to do is done, they're usually okay with it.
Yeah, I think that you make a good point, and it's almost like a three-prong process as well. Is like educate yourself on your rights as an employee, talk to your boss, um, and in that, talk to them, let them know your condition, educate them on your condition, and
Yes.
then let them know this is what I might need, this is what I need. It's like making expectations clear, like because you're right, it can be a scary thing. Well, I remember when I told my boss, it was a year into working there. And the reason I had to say something is because I worked where I worked was the headquarters of a chain of sushi restaurants. And I was doing recruitment, and they started to want me to get into training and working at the restaurant on the floor. And I tried, but I would come home days and I'd be exhausted because I would have been on my feet for 2 to 3 hours. It wasn't
Yeah.
even that long. But with chronic fatigue and chronic pain, like I couldn't be on my feet. And so I had to sit down with my boss and I say, look, I actually can't be doing this sort of work because I told him about my condition and this is what I have. And um, at the time, so he was the general manager and then there was the company president. And we kind of worked it out how we weren't going to tell the company president because he was probably going to not be accommodating.
Right.
So the GM was gonna kind of like shield me from that, which is like a bit,
That's awesome.
yeah, it was really nice of him.
Yeah.
And so he kind of like was made it so that I didn't have to go work or like made excuses or something, which is so good because he was, great about it. But it's kind of one of those things as well. Like I I had to hide it, which is not the best. Like I would, there'd be days where I'd go into work and I had full wrist braces halfway up my arm, and I was
Wow.
typing, and I was it's because I was in pain in my wrist. Like I had this
Uh,
terrible tendonitis, and but I kind of made an excuse like, oh, I just my wrist hurt or something like that. And once I told my boss, though, I felt a lot more empowered, and I think at the time I didn't really need a lot. It was more, I just told him, like, look, there's going to be times where I'm going to need to go in the back room and lay on the floor and just
yeah.
for 10 to 15 minutes zone out. Do you ever do that?
Yes. I mean, I just sit down. So, like with teaching, I'm supposed to be walking around, checking students' work. And sometimes I'm just in my seat. And usually they say, teachers should not just be in their chair. You need to walk around, you need to monitor the room. And so my principal knew, like, hey, if I'm sitting down, my intestines are probably burning up. They hurt a lot. It's not that I'm not watching my students. It's not that I don't care that they're doing their work, but I'm just in pain. So I'm sitting down.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's totally fine. And honestly, like, And okay, so here's my question then about that. Do you feel guilt about that? And how do
Yes.
you manage that? I
I
know it's
have to.
getting a bit deep, but like
Yeah.
it's
No,
real.
it's okay. Yes, it is. It is so real, especially because I love my students and that's my passion. Like I want to teach them. And sometimes I'm just too in pain to do that. So I just take a couple of breaths and I take a few minutes for myself and I kind of remind myself I need to be well and I need to be healthy in order to help them. So I can't help others if I'm not helping myself first. And usually the pain passes with between 5 to 10 minutes. If it persists, then it's probably a day where I have to leave early, but usually the pain will come and go and I just kind of need a few minutes to, kind of breathe through it and get through it. But yeah, I definitely feel guilty for sure.
Yeah, that's a tough one, hey. It's like this constant with as a spoonie, like dealing with that feeling of guilt or shame about holding people back or not doing as well as you could be, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, I mean, I didn't necessarily expect the conversation to go in this direction, but I think it's maybe something to explore because it's almost a guilt that kind of permeates everything you do in your work and your personal life and friends. And like, I mean,
Yes.
going further, like, I love that you say you're so right in saying that it's if you are the best version of yourself, looking after yourself, then that makes you the best version for other people. And so it's almost like um, let's make it about it's because when it's about us, we don't do what we should be, right? It's like we just
Yeah.
feel guilty. But if we're making it about other people, like, okay, if I look after myself, then I can be better for this person.
Yeah.
It's almost more motivating, you know what I mean?
Exactly. It gives you a reason to want to feel good for yourself, but also for others. Yeah.
Yeah, so take away, deep breath,
Yeah.
and center and say like something like, "Oh, if I'm the best version of myself, if I look after myself, then that means that I'm better for other people." I love that.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I was actually looking at some of the statistics around chronic illness, and like I don't know if you knew this, and I've talked about this in previous episodes. Statistically, 7 out of 10 Americans have a chronic illness.
That's really high. I didn't
It's
expect that.
really high. It's
Yeah.
actually crazy. And
Yeah.
when we're talking about chronic illness or chronic condition, it's like it's not just I mean, it's arthritis, it's asthma, it's Crohn's, it's
Yeah.
chronic fatigue, anxiety, depression, PTSD, a wide range of conditions, but that's massive. And the statistic in Australia is 50% of Australians have a chronic illness. And then worldwide, 30% of adults have multiple chronic conditions. So
That's
it's
it's
massive, right?
surprising.
And
Yeah.
yeah, it is surprising. And if you think about chronic illness, it affects millions of lives, billions of
I
lives,
feel like
actually.
Yeah, I just feel like for me it's surprising because we tend to feel so alone sometimes. Like with chronic illness, we think we have to hide it. We feel so alone. So when I hear that there's so many other people that are living through this and feeling the same, it blows my mind.
Yeah. So it's crazy. And I was looking at some of the statistics, at least in Australia, and the annual loss in workforce participation from chronic illness in Australia was around 537,000 people in full-time employment, and then
Wow.
47,000 in part-time employment. So if you so it's interesting because in this number, this 537,000, 40% of this loss was associated with arthritis, 25% with depression, and around 10% with asthma and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So it's like it's interesting. It's just interesting these statistics because 537,000, that's not a small number if you're looking at a population of around 25 million, which I don't know how much of that is in the workforce, but that's
Yeah.
significant.
Yes.
And I don't know what the statistic is in the US, but one of the reasons I'm so passionate about what I'm doing is like this is a massive issue. And the encouragement, I guess, for people listening is we need to start raising our voices. There are resources out there for people to find to get help with their chronic illness in the workplace. And we're going to add those to the show notes. But I just hope that in our conversation, we can start the conversation and people can get thinking. And listeners, please don't make the mistake I did and not say anything, not advocate for yourself. And I love when we were talking about doing this subject or this topic, it's you've navigated it so well in the workplace. And I love that. And is there like what any last piece of advice you want to give before we move on to the next segment?
I think definitely the takeaways advocate for yourself and make sure that you're taking care of you so that you can take care of others. I think those two things are super important for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it a lot of times comes back to advocating for yourself and and feeling empowered and giving yourself the permission to do that. And I hope that like this conversation maybe helps people kind of start to think along those lines.
Yes.
And so I wanted to switch gears because we're kind of nearing the end of the chat. And one of the things that we like to do is get recommendations from people that come on the podcast of like, what do you like? What's your recommendation of the moment? Like how we get excited about things and like tell all our friends.
Yes.
Books, TV shows, music, podcasts. What do you recommend for the listeners?
Okay, so for books, because this summer I was in a book club, which I'll need to find another one because I love being a part of book clubs. But I read a book called The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which was so, so, so good. Highly recommend it. And
What
that's
is it
just like,
about?
so The Vanishing Half is about two twin sisters who can pass as white, but they're actually black. And it's just, they kind of lead separate lives and just kind of see the racial injustice in both of their lives. It's very interesting.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really I'd like to read that. It's very interesting for the climate as
Yes, for
well.
what's going on in the political climate for sure. Yeah.
Um, I just have one last question, which is kind of not as much related. Did you have anything else you wanted to recommend?
So for my nonfiction, because I always read a fiction and a nonfiction.
Okay.
So I have another book that I'm reading nonfiction called The Empowered Patient. And that
Okay.
one talks a lot about chronic illness and kind of how to advocate for yourself when you go to your doctor's office. And I think it also talks a little bit about in the workplace, I want to say. There might be a chapter or two on that. And it's The Empowered Patient by Elizabeth Cohen. It's a
Okay.
really good, yeah.
And we'll put that information in the show notes as well. And that's awesome. Thanks for the recommendation. Well, thank you so much for coming to chat with me on the podcast. Honestly, conversation was super interesting. And again, I just wanted to just throw out there that you're a Chronic Hope ambassador, and we love that. And thank you so much for being part of the organization. Your attitude, your heart really embodies who we are, and I'm excited kind of for the next phase and the next step of the organization and what that looks like. And for those of you listening, I hope this was really helpful. And if you have any questions about anything or comments, shoot us a direct message or an email. We'd love to hear from you guys. Thanks again, Erica, for coming on.
Yes, thank you for having me.